Today, we're looking at a magenta ink from Monteverde Garnet. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, there's timestamps down below, but if you've got the time, I would appreciate you checking out the entire video. If you'd like, you can follow me over on Instagram as an ink guy. Also, if you're new here, I do fountain pen ink reviews daily, so I would invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this italics Chaplin's tankards with an oblique italic nib to write for the day and to take my notes for this video. For the first writing sample, I use Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. There are additional writing samples later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, so it came in a vial that looks something like this. To keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. Now the extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade, 9 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the extra fine, about the same tone as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no real shading, 14 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show the slightest bit of color variation, far left to far right. I'm really not getting it in the writing. Tomoe River, no bleeding, normal Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. The extra fine is quite a bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 16 seconds to dry. The medium is darker than the extra fine, same tone as the stub, no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 23 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both shows no color variation, and we didn't get any. And Rhodia, no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade, 11 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone as the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 16 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the medium far left to far right and the extra fine far left to far right do show some color variation, but it's not coming through in the writing sample, and I think that it's showing it because I do a scrubby all the way across and then about part way back to see if the layer will make it a little darker, and I think that's what I'm seeing there. I agree with Vita that we can learn a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this magenta really push its way up away from the water. It's running away, but it's not any kind of mixes. It's a magenta all the way. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And we don't really see a whole lot of difference. We see the slightest bit dragging away from the water that's moving up, so it's barely managing to hold on to the filter paper. But ultimately, we don't see a difference between them for being let dry. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, there is a lot of blurriness that starts going on in the capital H, and the lowercase h has the blurriness and a bit of blowout, so I would not use this in a note-taking situation. Now that's pretty obvious from the chromatography and water. Water is completely reactivating and lifting it off the paper. You can see at the top of the water the white of the paper coming through, which means water is all you need to get this out of your pen. Now the pen flesh does the same as the water because it's obliterating it, both of them. You don't need the pen flesh. You don't need the 1/3 bleach solution, which does completely remove it from the paper, but again, you don't need it. As far as viscosity or flow, for the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Monteverde's Garnet has a viscosity of 1.38, making this a very wet ink.
To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average those. Now for the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds.
Monteverde's Garnet has an average dry time of 15 seconds, so despite it being very wet, it has a normal dry time. Instead of finding inks that look like Monteverde's Garnet, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. And I wanted to go with a nice teal ink. So I chose Diamine Teal because its name matched exactly what I was looking for.
The second writing sample is done on Viscosity, black and red, and Franklin Christoph paper.
Here we have Viscosity notebooks. Now we get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine, as we've seen, it's still lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade, 7 seconds to dry. The medium is darker than the extra fine, same tone as the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 10 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both are showing us no color variation, and we're not getting any. Black and red notebooks, no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is a little bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade, 4 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the extra fine, same tone as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 5 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both aren't really showing us any color variation, and we're not getting any. Last up, Franklin Christoph. We have plenty of bleed spots. Okay, with the stub, with the extra fine, with the medium. But it's not coming all the way through. It's not touching the page underneath. You could probably use the back of the page if you're not super picky. And the ghosting is not actually very bad for all those bleed spots. Now the 1.1, a ton of feathering all over it. The whole thing's feathered. The whole thing. I'm looking for a letter that's not feathered. The N in Garnet doesn't have feathers on it. There we go, we got one. Now it has no spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. It's performing very nicely here. 4 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the extra fine, same tone as the stub. Not the same amount of feathering, but still getting a bunch of feathering. The word the has a ton of feathering all over it. The Z in lazy has a bunch of feathering. The CK in quick, a bunch of feathering. No spread, halo sheen, no shade, 6 seconds to dry. The scrubby for the extra fine far left to far right shows the slightest bit of color variation, although it's not up there. The medium shows none, and we got none, and that is all that I have for the writing sample.
So what do I think of Monteverde Garnet? It puts a very nice color down on the page. It doesn't really shade. Now, Garnet tends to be what I would prefer to use instead of a red. And if I didn't already have a favorite garnet, the Edelstein Garnet, this would likely take that place where I would go with this ink almost exclusively once my reds run out, and I'd go to this for grading papers. So what nib and pen give the best writing experience with this ink? I prefer a very wet pen, regardless of nib size. It's because this color itself to me is very nice. It's not screaming, it's kind of a calm red, which seems weird because red's a hotter color. Now it's not really red, but I use it as substitutes for reds because I just don't care for red inks, but I very much like Garnet. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.